So basically, when it comes to garment, when a person wears a garment, biblically it's not considered carrying. Biblically, it's part of his presentation. A person cannot imagine. However, there is some items a person not necessarily take the essential garments. Many times a person will have, is a very common thing to have jewelry. Many times a person will walk with a stick, which is not really a garment. Many times a person will carry a decor, which will be a hamsa, a kamea, or other items. So the entire chapter covers all aspects of wearing all types of garment. And the general rule, biblically, any types that is a garment that is there to protect the person, it is 100% legal and acceptable to carry on Shabbat. However, when it comes to jewelry, it is very important, though jewelry is a decorative item, but given the fact that many of the people who wear this jewelry, and especially ladies, they will have a strong drive to go and show off their jewelry and decoration to their friends. And by doing so, they may mistakenly carry more than 4 amois in Reshus Abim, which is a violation of Shabbat. So the general rule that any type of a jewelry that there is a suspicion that a lady may go and show off with that particular object to her friends, this rabbinically was restricted. And the general guidelines to make a distinction between a jewelry that is very strongly tied to the body, and then there is that they are loosely tied. If the jewelry is loosely tied, so then the likelihood for them to show off is higher. If jewelry is strongly tied, the likelihood is lesser. Then the other distinction, what type of lady it is. There is some ladies who are very simple, and therefore they will always gonna take the opportunity to show off their jewelry to their friends. But then there is other types of lady who consider themselves to be very prestigious, and they would never show off to their friends. Today, for example, most of the halachic authorities are considering the ladies in our time as mostly prestigious, that they will never take their jewelry actually out of their body and show off to their friends. And for that reason, the general acceptable opinion amongst the majority of authorities that it is okay to wear jewelry. Then there is a discussion whether an individual may carry on Shabbat arms. Of course, if it's a time of a war, goes without saying that it is allowed, because as we have covered last week, anything that comes in order to save lives, not only it is allowed, but it is forbidden not to apply the carry-on of arms on Shabbat. But the issue is of here when there is no such a danger. Can arms be considered as part of a garment or not? And the Rambam says, although biblically yes, but nevertheless, the rabbinical restricted it. Why they have restricted it? Since it cannot be a permanent garment, as we know the prophets have prophesied that in the times of Moshiach they will take their swords and they will turn them to plowshares. And if it would be a wonderful garment, it would be permanent even at the times of Moshiach. Since it's not going to be permanent there, so obviously it's not a garment that is acceptable to carry it on Shabbat. Then the Rambam of today deals with one principle that spreads into 3 chapters. And the principle is to explain what was the driving force behind the restriction that the rabbis have introduced in connection to the rules of Shabbat. As we have learned till now, that in every rule of Shabbat, there are 3 levels. There is biblically restricted, then biblically permitted but rabbinically restricted, and then there is the 3rd level that it's permitted to everybody, both biblically and rabbinically. So the question is, what was the driving force for the rabbis to introduce restrictions? The rabbis were not there to make our life hard, but the rabbis were there in order to prevent us from falling into the trap, that so-called margin of safety. We know in every system, whether it's banking system, whether it's medical system, any type of system, considering the margin of safety, you will always introduce measures and regulation in order to prevent an individual to be trapped in a situation that he will pay for it, that he would be liable for it. So the main principle, says the Rambam, that any activity that may look like may appear externally like a biblical violation, or may not necessarily appear but may lead in the future to a biblical violation, so therefore they have restricted it. Again, to go through the entire 39 melachot of Shabbat, there is not enough time. However, I will try to zoom in on 3, 4, or 5 melachot based on the time that will allow us. There is, for example, there is one of the melachot of Shabbat, is the idea of kotzer. Kotzer is uprooting, chopping a wheat or barley or any type of a growing, whether it's a tree, whether it is a grain, whether a vegetable. It's melechet kotzer, or called tolesh. Tolesh is somebody who uproots a living vegetable or any form of growth from the ground. Now, for example, if a person has a beehive, so to remove the honey from the hive, biblically there is no problem, given the fact that it is not growing from the ground, it's not like a vegetable. Yet, given the fact that it appears externally like a tolesh, like uprooting, for that reason, the rabbinical restriction. Another situation also in connection to the melacha of tolesh. A person should not ride on a horse or any other animal, and for that reason they have extended any usage on animals on Shabbat, since there is always a suspicion when a person rides, he may, while he is riding the horse, take or uproot a branch from its tree or so on. For that reason, a person is not allowed to climb on a tree or use a tree on Shabbat, for the same reason that there is always a suspicion that he may violate the melacha of kotzer tolesh for that reason. There is quite a large material that is all offshoots from the shchikat samemanin, part of the melachot of Shabbat, of the biblical forbidden activities, is grinding. When a person, remember we started according sidura de pat, according to the order how you preparing a bread. So first you're plowing, then you're planting, then you're chopping, then you're collecting, and then you're grinding. So the grinding of the grains is a biblical prohibition. But then Chachamim have introduced a restriction of any usage of medical ingredients, not for when a person is sick and there is a danger to his life, it's a separate story. We're talking over here when a person is healthy and he wants to obtain different items that they are made or primarily being used for medical reason. Since in the olden days part of the medical preparation of remedies was involved in grinding, so for that reason they have widely spread the prohibition of so-called shchikat samemanim, grinding ingredients. So for that reason many of the type of remedies that were commonly used in medical connections were restricted in Shabbat, including exercise. The reason why exercise was throughout the week, the more the better. But when it comes to Shabbat, although exercise is a wonderful thing throughout the week, the reason it was restricted on Shabbat, again, as an offshoot of the gzeira, of the decree of Shchikat Samemanin, which is again an offshoot that the rabbis introduced from the idea of Tchina. There is another very large, again, I'm just speaking on the things that really have developed a lot. Also, an offshoot, everybody knows that we're not doing business on Shabbat and we're not doing dealings, and there is no, even a person is not allowed to do a hekdesh, to dedicate something to the temple. And a person is not allowed to divorce on Shabbat, a person is not allowed to marry on Shabbat. All those reasons, they are offshoots from a decree of Rabbanan, a rabbinical decree, since all of them generally involved with writing, with documenting, with record keeping, and therefore there is a possibility he will write it down. So so many activities were restricted as a result of it. Another activity that happens to be also a widely spread activity that have multiplied by many decrees of Rabbanan is the melacha of makeh bepatish. Literally translated makeh bepatish, somebody who is hammering with a hammer, clapping with a hammer. But although it is expressed clapping with a hammer, but it's a general reference to any activity that is completing a job, turning a situation or making a change in a status. For that reason, for example, if a person is contaminated, so for him to go out of his contamination into a state of purity on Shabbat, it may be a problem. There is a person takes an item that no Turma and Maaser were given yet, and he is elevating and making Turma, and by doing so he is permitting the item to be edible. It's a problem. He is doing the melacha of makeh bepatish, the rabbinical makeh bepatish. It's not the biblical makeh bepatish, but it's the rabbinical. So the idea of changing an item from one status to another status, although the change is not a physical change, but it's a halachic change, nevertheless, it's still being viewed as a offshoot, as an extension of the melechet makeh bepatish. There is another issue that is being quite squeezing. The idea of squeezing, there is two types of squeezing. A person can squeeze a fruit, and in fruit there is three types of fruit a person can squeeze. He can squeeze grapes and olives, which is a biblical problem. A person can go and squeeze strawberries and pomegranate, which is a rabbinical problem. And then there is other items that a person can squeeze. According to the Rambam, there is no rabbinical also. Others are arguing, but right now we're studying the Rambam. However, there is also a difference where a person squeezes, whether a person squeezes into an empty plate or where a person squeezes into a plate that is full of food. When he squeezes into a plate that is full of food, it is less severity involved. I'm just using it because it's a very common area that's important for people to know. In the upcoming days, we'll cover more major issue, which is also quite wide, all the intricacies of muktzeh. Everybody heard the muktzeh, but so we'll try to make a clarity, and that will be tomorrow night. So thank you very much.